welcome to a new video. If you are new here, my name is Amandine. I've been living in Singapore for 4 years, and on this channel I like to share about anything that's happening in Singapore. In this video I wanted to discuss about the things that you might have to give up on when you are moving to another country. In my case, I moved from France to Singapore, so let's see the aspect of my life that has changed and the things that I just had to let go of. The first one, and what most people think about when they move overseas, I think, is like family and friends, your social circle. Hopefully is to create a social circle in the country you are going to, but it's often like there is a transition period that is not always easy, and also over time you might miss more of your family depending the life stage you are in. And concerning your friends, it's not really something that you can avoid. You are just gonna grow apart. It doesn't mean that if you are going back in your home country you won't be able to see them. It's just gonna be like a little different with my friends, different with my family also. Now when I'm going to visit them, it's always such a good time because we are not living in the day-to-day, and I'm visiting them like about once every 1.5 years. I think it's also because we have a lot more to share and like on the adventure kind of level, not like the day-to-day. So that's just how we are doing it now. And for the day-to-day, it's also more difficult because of the time zone. I mean, France to Singapore, it's about 8 hours difference, 7 when it's like summertime. So you have no choice but to navigate with that. After 4 years in Singapore, we kind of like got used to, like, I know I call my parents every Sunday in the evening, so for them it's lunchtime, and for me it's just before I'm going to bed. And for my friends, often they just like answer me when they're awake and I answer when I'm awake, so we just live like that. For some people it might be more challenging though. There are times definitely that I had homesickness, but often it's like it can be fixed with food, so I just enjoy some French food. It's more difficult when you are missing a person. Often they cannot just fly in, and you cannot fly because often you have work and you have like leaves that you have to take. So it's totally normal to miss the home comfort because, I mean, especially in my case, I came from France to Singapore. Singapore is still like, it's easy to adapt in Singapore, but it's still like a community that is heavily influenced by Asian way of doing. So of course you have like new habits, so like all those change can often like lead to like being overwhelming to move to a new country. So yeah, you really just have to adapt a little by a little, and yeah, just be okay with letting go of some of your habits, some of your people, to just learn a new way. In my case, I think it took about like maybe at least 2 months to really find like my places where I like to go, where I like to hang out, some of the people I would be friends with. So I think it's important to give you like some time. Sometimes it can be like even 1 year, 2 years before you really find Singapore, like you can call it home in a sense. I think it's also important that you find a place, a home, like condo, whatever, a room that you are renting or that you are buying, and you really make it feel like home, because I think that's what helped me when I moved from France to Singapore. I make sure that I brought some of the items that I know would help me settle in. The biggest barrier for people to settle in a house, I think, is really the space, like the personal space that you're gonna have, because in Singapore the houses are often way smaller. So if you are used to like a big house, so yeah, there is a bit of adaptation to do here. Concerning like your social circle and your personal self, there is like work to do there and things to let go of. Now I want to try to talk a bit more about the cultural norms that you have to adapt and things that are changing from, like, for example, France to Singapore. Because France to Singapore, we definitely have different cultural norms and etiquette of like everything. And for example, just a basic thing is the cultural celebrations. Singapore is a blend of many cultures, so they had to pick like a few dates that will remain as holiday. In France, the calendar is linked to the Catholic calendar. So there are some holiday in France that we don't have, like, I mean, as a day off in Singapore doesn't mean that you cannot do it, but sometimes like my parents would be like on holiday in France and then I would be working in Singapore. So you can see some difference here, but also in terms of who is going to do the holiday. For example, Christmas is coming, and I often ask my Singaporean friends, oh, what are you doing for Christmas? No, no, no. And often they are just not doing anything. I think nowadays young people like to do friend gathering and maybe exchange some gifts, but it's not something that you do with your family, where in France is definitely a family event. So you can feel in Singapore Christmas is mostly like marketing, like stores will have like Christmas promotion, but there is not really like a Christmas spirit coming from the household. But I mean, it's also not bad because here living in Singapore, I've discovered like so many other celebrations. For example, recently there were Deepavali, we went out, and it's always really interesting to discover like other culture. We did a quick vlog if you want to go and check it out. Culture wise, there is also the fact that English is mostly spoken in Singapore. If you go to a country that is speaking your own native language, of course you will have I mean, in my sense, a huge advantage. In my case, I was coming from France, so we are speaking French. And then in Singapore, it's English. You can also learn like Malay, Tamil, or Chinese. But English is still like widely spoken in like business, education, and government. And the first day I came from France to Singapore, definitely my English wasn't really there. I started doing those videos in English so that I could like speak more and try to formulate some idea that are like coherent and concise. I think I still need some improvement, but what I mean is that sometimes there could be a language barrier when you are moving overseas. I mean, we definitely feel this language barrier, especially now that my boyfriend is Singaporean, so he speaks mostly English and Chinese. Lucky for me is learning French, and he's really good at French, but in my case I'm learning Chinese and it's also very difficult. I have my brother coming this weekend, actually really excited. Of course we're gonna do a vlog and like itinerary of things to do in Singapore, but my brother mostly speak French, so I'm gonna be working some of the time he's here in Singapore, so we'll see how he can handle Singapore. I'm actually quite curious to see how he's gonna make it. But I often receive messages from people asking me, oh, how can I learn English? Can you teach me English? So in my case, I cannot teach you English because mine is not there, and like I learn from someone I'm not able to teach. Eventually, there are some schools of English in Singapore, so there are some people who are coming, especially when they are sent by their company, so they are coming to Singapore and only then they are learning English, but it's really a risky move because like you have to be sure that you will be able to learn. Then you have the familiarity of the places. Moving from France to Singapore, like I feel like it's still okay because it's like buildings, but if you look closer, like for example the places where you go shop are really different in France. So first we are taking the car to go and buy our groceries, but it's often like huge massive kind of like malls. But in Singapore it's often smaller supermarket. I think the biggest must be Giant. I think there is a super big Giant, but it's often like very far out, Tampines or something like that. I've been once, I was like, okay, this is more similar to what I'm using in France, but if you go to your regular like Fair Price, Cold Storage, often they are a bit smaller. Then you won't have the familiarity of the doctor, the hospital, so this is like always something like super scary when you move overseas. After 4 years, like I've been to the doctor a few times, so I've gotten used to it. I understand how the insurance works, this kind of details, but yeah, you have to get familiar with how things work in a new country. So it's a lot of learning, which is like good for the brain, I guess, but often challenging, like especially like the first few months when you have to do everything at the same time. You just wish that everything goes smoothly. So in Singapore, like things are very smooth, the government things, the banking system, so you won't like struggle so much. But could have some hiccup. Then in the culture, because I'm coming from France, I have to mention the food with like a big amount of cheese and the wine culture. So those are things that I had to like let go of. I'm not eating as much cheese as I was in France, and luckily I wasn't a big wine drinker, so this part is okay. It's more like the food and the cheese for me. Like I love charcuterie, I don't even know like the food that we have in France, but it's just really different from what we have in Singapore, especially because in Singapore most of the time we are eating out. In France we do way more cooking, which I still do a fair bit in Singapore, but it's just like not as convenient, so that's why like eating out is just the way to go. Another big point that I have to mention is that, so I mentioned it already, in Singapore I had to let go of like the thought of owning a car and driving in Singapore. In France, it's really common. Most people learn to drive when they are 17 and then will have a car by their 20s. So you are used to drive everywhere you go. It's also because the things are also further apart. So the reason why I gave up on owning a car and driving a car in Singapore is mostly because the public transport in Singapore are quite convenient, so I don't feel there is a need to it. But also owning a car in Singapore is really expensive because first you have to buy an imported car, which is like crazy expensive, and then you have to pay for like, it's not a driving license, they call it COE. So it's like a permit to own a car for like 10 to 15 years, and the price vary by a lot. I think the latest price was like $100,000 on top of the car that you have to buy, and then you have the maintenance fee, you have the parking fees, etc. So it was never an option for me. Actually, like not me, but Lynn drove a car in Singapore. So in Singapore there are some rental cars that you can get, like for example we went to IKEA, we needed to carry some stuff, then we are just renting the car. The service we are the most used to is GetGo, and then there is also this Blue SG, so it's like rental cars, you can pay by hourly system. So it's also quite convenient that we don't feel like we need to have our own car, because if eventually we're in the situation we need like something to go around, then we know we can rent it. Actually, I'm thinking about cycling also. I think there are way more people cycling, even like to commute in France than in Singapore. The roads are not really safe to go cycling, like commuting. I think there are still like many accidents. Cycling for leisure is definitely a thing. Like there are even like clubs, and you can see like group of people just like cycling together. And Singapore has the PCN park connector, so you can go like almost all around the island, and it's like kind of undisturbed roads where you can cycle. So this is definitely really nice to like leisure cycle, but to commute is not really a thing. I touch on this next part also, is like the government system. You have to adapt from the French government system to the Singapore government system, or wherever you are coming from and going to. Most notably, I'm thinking about the healthcare system, because in France we have like this kind of like insurance and medical security that as a foreigner I don't have in Singapore. So often you have to get your own insurance. You have to consider what you are going to pay if you are going to the doctor or to the hospital. There is also something that we have in Singapore that is not in France, is that in Singapore you can find TCM, so it's traditional Chinese medicine, and often those ones are like reimbursed by the insurance, so you can go like 4 or 5 times a month. Still hasn't been, but I definitely want to go. I haven't found the one that I really want to go to yet, so like it's a bit scary, so it's hard to find one where you feel like, oh, you can trust. So it's something also like when you are moving from like somewhere to somewhere else, you have to find like the provider that you like. So of course your general doctor, but also the other provider that you might need. Like I'm thinking about like as a woman, like you have to find a gynae that you like. For me, I haven't been in Singapore yet, so I don't know about that yet, but you have to like consider those kind of things. I don't have kids also, so I cannot really talk about like the school system in Singapore, but definitely if you are taking your kids out of school like in France and you bring them in Singapore, I think it would be really different, because they have to go to international school. I know there is a French international school in Singapore that is quite nice, like most French people go there, but I really don't know like how much change it would be for a kid. Next is something I'm kind of happy I let go of, is the fact that France has 4 seasons, so we have especially like a distinct winter season. Then we have like a summer which is like very hot, and in Singapore it's mostly the same temperature all year round, so it's something that I appreciate because then I have like one wardrobe. But it's true that often you feel like time is always the same in Singapore because like in France you will have cycle, so some people might miss the variety. And I think it's also down to like the nature, like oh you see like outside is changing, but in Singapore like building are different but the nature is always the same. There is no like orange leaves. Actually sometimes there is a blossom, but that's really all you can see. In Singapore you cannot see mountains also, like some people when they are complaining about Singapore they are saying oh Singapore is just flat. The highest here is like Bukit Timah, which is not really high. I do appreciate the richness of parks that Singapore offers. Like for example, if you want it to be really different, you can go to Sungai Buloh Wetland Reserve and you don't feel like you're in Singapore anymore. Then I really like Singapore Botanic Garden, really like Christie. So for me, those are like a bit different, but some people might think that oh, it's just like an easy hike. Then I think something that I had to let go of is the work-life balance. I'm not saying that I don't have a work-life balance in Singapore, but it's definitely different from the one in France. In France, we have way more holidays within the year. So I think in France, we have almost like 5 weeks, where in Singapore, I have like 14 days. So yeah, with 14 days, you can do way less than 5 weeks. Especially if you like to travel, it can be really tough to live just out of 14 days. Luckily, like in my case, my work allowed me to work remote for the month of December, so that's how I managed to go 1 month in Europe. But it's not given to anyone. If you really cannot like live with 14 days, I suggest that you really negotiate your leaves when you are negotiating your employment contract. I think most companies will be okay offering you 21 days. Luckily in Singapore we have holiday, and if the holiday is like on a Saturday or Sunday, then the Friday or the Monday will be off, so that's like absolutely top, so that you can place your holiday strategically so that you get the most like time off out of your day off. On a day-to-day basis though, I don't feel like I'm working more in Singapore than I would work more in France if it's something that you are afraid of. And last thing that you have to like let go of is technically the European travel. In my case, because I'm from France, you are gaining something, the Asian travel, because in Singapore you can go to like so many different Asian countries. Recently we've been to Phuket, really been enjoying that. But if you are from France or anywhere in Europe, there is also so many countries you can go to. I'm glad that I have so much time in Europe, like 1 month, because we are going to go visit some other countries that I haven't been to in Europe, so it's still okay in my case. I find like arrangement, but if you are planning on moving somewhere else, maybe like try to visit around like your home country first, so that you won't have regret and have to do it like later on. So yeah, those are all the things that you have to give up on when you are moving overseas, when you are moving to Singapore. Of course, everyone is different and everyone is having his own experience of moving overseas. If there is anything particular about your move to Singapore, do let me know in the comment section so we can discuss about it. But that's gonna be it for me. If you want to follow our time in Singapore with my brother, do follow me on Instagram or TikTok, and also like our time in Europe. I'm going to share on Instagram and TikTok first often because I need more editing for the YouTube videos, so I think those are going to come later. But I thank you so much for watching. Thank you for following my adventure. It's soon the end of the year, so I'm feeling like a bit nostalgic and very grateful for you watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.